A friend of mine by the name of the Reverend Lillian Daniels, who's the senior minister at the Congregational United Church of Christ in Glen Ellen, Illinois, writes, I remember the day I decided I would never, ever be a tither. I was sitting in the pews as an associate minister listening to the senior minister preach. The senior minister, who was a tither, was telling us all about it. He was explaining that being a tither meant that he had always given the biblically commended tithe, 10% of his income, to the church, then still more to other causes, and that God had blessed him for it. That wasn't hypocrisy. He was 64 years old, really did it, and he believed that financial peace had come to him as a result. But she goes on to say, but I couldn't stand to hear it. I was paying off massive student loans, full-time daycare for my first baby, and to be honest, even though I lived in a lovely parsonage, I was seriously underpaid by that church. Newly married, my husband and I had discovered that we were not different from most couples and that major stress in our nascent marriage was money. In fact, we had just had an argument about our spending the night before that had ended without answers, but no shortage of hurt feelings. I was in no mood in hearing about tithing. So as he preached, I told myself and God, I will never, ever be a tither. Well, good morning, everybody. I guess you got the idea right now. We're going to talk about stewardship, right? Did you get the hint? Yeah. So I know a lot of people here, haven't been here for a while, or confirmations just started, but this is the time of the year that for about 3 or 4 weeks, we take time to talk about stewardship, the ministry of stewardship. And we begin talking about what are we going to do, that stewardship is just as important as praying and serving, and how are we going to manage our money. And so over the weeks ahead, we're going to be talking about what does it mean to be a good steward when it comes to what we do with our life and the world and with our gifts and those kind of things. So that we'll be doing that till all the way through November the 10th. Now, next week, we're still going to talk about stewardship a little bit, but we're having a little bit of a different service next week. We're going to have a remembrance and healing service next week because it is the anniversary of Superstorm Sandy, so we're going to take part of that service next week. But overall, we'll be talking about stewardship for the next 3 or 4 weeks. And I know when we talk about stewardship, it's always one of those time of the year that everybody wants to kind of dive under the pews, kind of time. And so we start thinking about and get a little uncomfortable. But really, stewardship is really thinking about how we're going to give back to God the blessings that we have earned or that we have received. And so we'll spend time doing that. I've decided that the church has got to be one of the craziest funding systems ever. Because, we're not like a fee for service or operation. So you decide you want to have a lawn service cut your grass. So what do? You go out and you get bids, and you take the bid you think is going to work the best, and you pay your fee. Somebody comes and cuts your grass every week. Or you're not feeling very well, and you go see your doctor. And between you and your insurance company, you pay the bill. Or you decide to join a club, and you pay the fee. But the church isn't like that. The church is a place where people are invited to become and to grow in their faith and become disciples of Christ. And then that discipleship learn how to give of their time and talent and treasure in a meaningful way that becomes a part of the joy of what it means to be a Christian. So that's what we're going to talk about. And it's so much different than the rest of the world. Somebody decides to join a country club. There's a set fee. You decide to join a sports club. There's a set fee. And you decide to do something else. There's a fee. But here, whether you don't have to give anything. We're kind of like NPR in that way. You can listen for free. And somebody else pays the bill. But just like NPR, every once in a while, we talk about money and about what a great institution we are and about how you can support that. And so what I find over the years that one of the things I've discovered about your congregation is that you've done a really good job over the years talking about giving as a spiritual discipline, as part of our faith, and talked about how important it is to be percentage givers, is to find a percent that we're going to give to God and begin to working on as part of our spiritual discipline. I know for myself, when I talk about stewardship, I always invite people that when they join a church, they ought to think about like making a half tithe as a place to start on their way to tithing as a way that we're all become equal in what we're doing as far as the equality of what we're giving and taking from the church. So those are some of the things that we're going to be talking about in the weeks ahead. So if you were a half tither or a tither, what would that mean for your life? Well, let's go back to Reverend Daniels and see what she did with that. So like I said, she was not having a very good day about when she heard her sermon about tithing. And she was said, my senior minister colleague doesn't understand what's going on at all. His house is paid off. His kids are grown. He's a widower. He doesn't know my situation at all. So guess what she did? The next time it was her time to preach, she got up and said, you know, I understand what our senior minister is talking about, but you know, in life, I want to have cars and clothing, and I want to travel, and I want to buy the stuff on TV, and I have all these massive loans, and I have debt that people don't want to talk about. I have credit card debt. So when I give, it's really a sacrifice, so I never plan to be a tither. She said it didn't turn out to be one of her best stewardship sermons. But she said it caused a lot of conversation, especially between her and the senior minister, who she had contradicted. And he explained to her, he says, you know, God doesn't expect you to be perfect, but he gave the advice that if you choose to tithe, all your anxiety about money will go away. And she said she filed it under somebody who doesn't understand my situation. Well, a few years later, she found herself as the soul minister in a church in New Haven, Connecticut. And she was still, and so as the senior minister, she had to give the talk about stewardship. And she was still struggling with her own kind of bipolar understanding of money, because she had grown up in a family that really had either only argued about money or talked about it behind closed doors. And she was always anxious. And so she had discovered that, you know, over her ministry, that, you know, if you worry about it, or if you get excited about it, it doesn't really help. And so she was still struggling herself. And she was getting ready for the stewardship sermon one year. She had to go up to a meeting in Hartford, and on the way home she got caught in a traffic jam. And now that I kind of go through Hartford on the way to see my kids in Boston, I know what she means, because I've gotten stuck in those myself. And so she was stuck on this bridge. And she realized that because of the traffic jam, she was going to be late to pick up now her 2 kids that were in daycare. That was going to cause another fine that was going to add to their problems, because her husband at the time was a labor organizer, and in his field, whenever the workers went on strike, the labor organizers gave up their pay, and the workers were on strike. And so she was making more money because of her situation, but not enough to support the family. And so they had late night discussions about what bill to pay and how to pay the daycare and all those kind of things. And so it was kind of tense. And so she said that she found herself doing something that she had learned from her mother when she was under stress. She went shopping. And so her husband came home and would find these new pair of shoes in the closet. And she'd say, well, I've had those for years. And then he'd kind of frown and she'd go, but they were on sale, as they talked about how to pay the daycare. And so she was sitting on the bridge thinking about that extra fine. And she says, there's nothing like feeling sad and depressed and broke all at the same time, stuck in traffic, when she decided to pray. And she prayed to God to help her get out of the cycle that she was finding herself in. And when she opened her eyes, all of a sudden, the city of Hartford, the buildings were all aglow. And she says, like something heavenly that was just going up to the sky. And then she'd look away and look back, and it was Hartford again. And then she'd kind of close her eyes, and she'd look, and it was heavenly and gleaming. And she kind of, oh, that's kind of different. And she thought, well, I'm still stuck in traffic. Maybe I ought to pray again. And so the car was still stuck. And then she said, she prayed a little bit more, and she had a vision. And she said, now, I want you to let you know I hardly ever have visions, but I had one. And the vision was pretty clear. It was a credit card being cut up by a big pair of scissors, and a big present with a fabulous bow like you'd find under a Christmas tree, and the word 10%. And she opened up her eyes, and the traffic went moving, and she drove home and picked up her kids. And she got home, and she burst into her house, and she said to her husband, "We're going to cut up our credit cards, and we're going to tithe." And she wasn't sure what her husband was going to say, but he said, "You know, I've been waiting for you to say that for years." But she said she wasn't quite sure if he was impressed with her vision or for their financial plan. But then he said, "How are we going to pay the credit cards?" And then she emphasized number 2 of her vision. "We're going to get a big gift. Is there somebody in your family that is going to send us a check?" No, but not in her family either. But they took a leap of faith. So right then and there, they cut up their credit cards, and they filled out their pledge form, 10% tithe, and their automatic withdrawal, so that they never touched the money, and sent it all in. And they waited for the big gift. So she found herself going to the mailbox daily to check. It was never there. And then she asked, apparently, if you're going to win the lottery, you got to buy a ticket. And the gift never came. But she says, you know, because of that day, after a couple years, somehow they managed to pay off all their credit card debt. And they had a new understanding about what their money was about, and they found they had more money available to give to charities and other things, and their life was different. They still had problems, but things seemed to be better for some reason. And yet the gift never came. But then she asked, or had it? Because as she got thinking about all the things that went on in their life, when there were times when they were a little short on camp registration money or money for band lessons, their parents would come through sometimes with a little extra gift. Or when times were lean and it was hard to go out for dinner, couples would get together and have dinner parties together. And all the little blessings of their children and all the little things that came their way. And she realized that she had gotten the present all along, even the present of Jesus Christ, who died for our sins so long ago. And so she says, I know that now that I'm the one that stands up and talks about stewardship and percentage giving and what all that means to me, she says, I have to testify that I remember that person who sat in the pews and said I would never, ever be a tither. And remember what that was like and how that experience humbled me. And she went on to say that you might be listening to me this day saying, I'll never, ever be a tither. And fortunately, God can work with that.